Hey guys, welcome back to A Page in the Chapter, or welcome if you are new here. My name is Paige, and today we're doing my October / Magical Hopathon wrap up. I am a little bit dreading this video just because I know how long it's gonna take and how many books I have to talk about, and that makes me dread this a little bit. However, I absolutely love having TBRs and wrap-ups on my channel every single month. I've recently started doing the TBRs, but I've always, since the start of my channel, done a monthly wrap-up, and I just love having that documentation of everything that I'm reading. It feels like I leave a year with something to show for everything that I've read. So even though I'm growing to kind of dread wrap-ups, I'm gonna keep doing them. So for the Magical Hopathon, I had a goal of reading a book for all 13 prompts, so 13 books. I kind of didn't manage that. I only managed to read 10, which meant that I went to 3 out of the 4 Disney parks. I'm actually pretty happy to have completed 3. I had a feeling towards the end of the month that 4 wasn't going to be possible anymore, and to be honest, in that last week of October that my most recent vlog followed, I really wasn't sure that I was going to be able to complete 3. I was feeling so slumpy, but I did it, and 10 books in a month I am proud of, and I am ready and like happy now in November that the pressure has been completely taken off of my reading. I can just read whatever I want when I want, and I'm really not caring that much if I don't read every single day. I've accepted that I will not be completing my Goodreads challenge this year. I'm about to go into all the 10 books that I read for the Magical Hopathon. Grab yourselves a tea, a hot chocolate, a book, whatever it is that you need. Go grab it and let's get on into the books. So I decided to start the Magical Hopathon in Magic Kingdom. This is just like the most stereotypical park, and the entry ticket prompt for this fit my reading style much more, so it seemed like a good idea to start with Magic Kingdom. So the prompt for this was a book with magical realism, and I chose The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I've been wanting to read an N.K. Jemisin book for the longest time, and this one really spoke to me. I thought it was a standalone. It is not a standalone, but the other books haven't come out yet, and it just seemed so original and unique. This book follows the souls of New York City as they have to come together to defeat a magical thing that is threatening the city of New York, and meaning that it's gonna die. And like every major city around the world has souls, and I'm guessing maybe every single book will follow a different city. I gave this book a 2 stars, and I will not be continuing with the series, so it doesn't really matter to me if it wrapped up or not, or what the next ones follow, because I have zero interest in them. This was a massive letdown. I really wanted to like it, but it was just so slow, so confusing. And this book is marketed as a fantasy. I found it in the fantasy section. N.K. Jemisin is a fantasy writer, but this book is very much a sci-fi. Even this magic that they are trying to defeat is described as an alien and looks very much like what you would picture an alien to look like. And I like fantasy, but I don't like sci-fi. It was not for me, and I just found it really confusing. I couldn't really follow it. My brain kept doing that thing where I'd get to the end of a chapter and just be like, what have I actually read? I think I zoned out that entire time. So whilst that's half my fault, it's also a sign that I really didn't like the book, because if I did, then I wouldn't have been zoning out. So yeah, I didn't like this. I didn't really like any of the different perspectives. The only perspective that I did like was the soul of Staten Island's perspective, and she was done so dirty. Staten Island was hardly in it, and it was treated like crap, and I did not like the storyline that happened with Staten Island. So yeah, I gave this a 2 star, and it was a huge letdown. I then went on to read The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I gave this a 3 star, I think. It's still got my tabs in it from when I was reading on live. Essentially, I really liked this book. I really loved the beginning and the end, and I loved how unique it was. And Neil Gaiman just has a way of writing really cozy, slightly spooky, but still a Disney kind of spooky book. Like, this was absolutely perfect for the vibes I was looking for, because I didn't want scary, I just wanted atmospheric and spooky, and this provided that. My main issue with it was it felt more like a series of short stories. There was a very clear beginning and end that linked together, but the middle bit, it was just kind of like he had no idea where the story was going to go in the middle. And then, yeah, it all kind of tied in together again at the end, but the middle was left out. It wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be, but I still really enjoyed it and would really recommend it. I realised that I didn't actually tell you what this is about. This is about Nobody Owens, and he is raised in a graveyard by ghosts since he is a baby, and he is like granted permission to see the ghosts and interact with the ghosts, and is granted some of the powers of the ghosts. And this leads him into adventures into the graveyard, discovering some of the other creatures that live in the graveyard, but also throughout this story he really realises the danger that comes from the human world and a particular human that wishes to cause him harm. I did then post my review of this on Instagram, and a couple of people messaged me to say that they read this as an audiobook and they really loved it. And having like conversations with people about Neil Gaiman in general, it seems that his books just tend to work better as audiobooks. So maybe if you are looking to consume some Neil Gaiman, maybe the audiobook is the way to go, and this like would have been better that way. I will say though, this is still a stunning experience to read because it's graphic. It's got like illustrations on almost every page, and that just makes it such a cool experience to read, and unlike anything else. So either way you're going to get a cool experience, but I think from what I've heard, people tended to give this a higher rating as an audiobook. I then read A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This did not disappoint. Like, does V.E. Schwab ever? And I have since ordered the other two books in this trilogy because I loved it so much that I didn't want to risk losing interest, so I just ordered them straight away. This is a fantasy that follows alternative realities of London. There's a white London, a grey London, and a red London. Our main character can travel between the two and is one of the only people in all of the worlds that can travel between the two. But there was once a black London which fell because of magic, and it causes all kinds of mayhem when a relic from Black London is found. It was so unique, so well written. I had a really, really good time with it. I do think our female main character, Lila, is quite irritating. She got on my nerves at times, but I also think she's supposed to be. Like, she's not a perfect character. They are both quite flawed characters, as from what I'm learning about V.E. Schwab, she tends to write. And it was really, really cool and really unique, and I cannot wait to see where the rest of this series goes, because it could go anywhere. It's so unlike anything I've ever read that I just cannot predict it. This was a definite yay of the readathon. And then for my final prompt of Magic Kingdom, I read Vicious by V.E. Schwab because I was really on a V.E. Schwab kick, and this is like a dark academia, much more spooky October vibe than A Darker Shade of Magic was. So this follows our main characters Victor and Eli, and in college they were best friends and they were looking at whether they could create extraordinary humans with magical powers and what it would take to make those. And when this thesis becomes experimental rather than theoretical, everything goes a bit haywire, and then we follow Victor 10 years later as he's broken out of prison and he's tracking down Eli, who is now his enemy. What I really, really loved about this book was the discussion of what actually is evil and what makes a villain, because both characters can be seen as the villains in this story, the villains of each other's story. They both really believe that what they're doing is the right thing. So what actually makes them villains? And also the discussion of religion and how this discussion of religion ties into this morality and discussion of what makes a villain was really, really interesting. I'm not a very religious person, but I do really like it when fantasies bring religion in and demonstrate how religion can affect politics or whatever type of story they're trying to write. And that's an element I really love, and this book did it flawlessly, if I do say so myself. I'm very intrigued to see where this goes and what actually happens with Victor and Eli. I then hopped over to Hollywood Studios because this readathon was making me nostalgic for my Disneyland Paris trip. And at Disneyland Paris they have a Walt Disney Studios, so I thought I'd go from Magic Kingdom to Hollywood Studios and it would kind of help me feel a bit like I'm in Paris again. So my first book for Hollywood Studios was The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. This book is fantastic. I waited all year to read this book because I wanted to read it in October, and I got it after October last year, and I told myself that I was not reading this in any other month than October. So I think I've honestly waited about 11 months to read this book. It was worth the wait though. I gave this 4 stars. So this follows our 3 main characters, and they are sisters, set in 1893, so it's a historical fantasy. Basically in this world there's no such thing as witches. They were all destroyed in Old Salem, and in New Salem there is no such thing as them. But as women start to become more and more frustrated with their social standing, the lack of ability to vote, that's how the magic is kind of brought in, and how these women start to seek out magic and start causing a lot of trouble for the patriarchy, causing, you know, all kinds of weird adventures and weird magical things to happen to these sisters. Alex E. Harrow is a historian, so that definitely helped. The history is so entwined in this plot, and it was done really, really well. I learned so much. I feel like everything really fit together well. This book is a little bit overcomplicated, like there's a reason it's so long. It's a very, very complex story, and if you read the acknowledgements, the author's note, whatever it is called in this book, Alex E. Harrow talks about how confused that she got when writing this because she wasn't entirely sure what story she wanted to tell, and you can kind of definitely see how that's the case. I have no idea how she wrote this book because it was so easy to follow along, but looking back and thinking about it, oh my god, were there a lot of different elements. Like, so much happened. I don't know how she didn't get so lost in this story. I highly recommend it. I will probably be rereading it next year. It was just so clever. My reviews are being very nice today because I am in a very good mood this morning. I have a new mug, I have hot chocolate, I've got a good book to read later, there's a new Animal Crossing update out, it's all good vibes. I then moved on to a reread of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is my favourite classic, and it's still very much my favourite classic. I gave it 5 stars again. There's just something about this book that I just love. And Frankenstein and Dracula are always like the two that are like tied together and talked about most in the Gothic genre. And I know most people prefer Dracula. I think I have quite an unpopular opinion in loving Frankenstein as much as I do. I can't help it. It's my brain's fault. Like, speak to whatever's going on in here because I've tried to understand it and I don't, so maybe you can try. But I just had a really good time with this. I think what really made this a fantastic experience for me was that I decided to annotate it. I literally just underlined, like I didn't, some places have little notes in the margins, but like I didn't highlight. I wanted my annotations to be subtle, and I decided to do this because I actually own many copies of Frankenstein, but I own 2 of the Penguin cloth bound specifically because I bought one and then I got one for Christmas. So I decided that since I have one that can remain as like a perfect cloth bound, there would have been nothing wrong with annotating it even if it was my only copy, but I always have a lot of like what ifs in my brain, so I like to have a perfectly neat copy. But yeah, I love this so much. The writing is absolutely beautiful. I love Mary Shelley as a person. She was a real bad bitch. Like, I love her. My favourite reading of this book is a Marxist reading, but reading through it again this time, I was like, oh my god, he's so gay. Like, he's so gay. So reading it in that way this time was very fun. And I had a really good time with it. This is why rereads can be fun. And then we have quite possibly the biggest disappointment of this whole readathon, and that is A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Camera. This is the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling following our main character Harper as she is like sucked into an alternate dimension that is the Kingdom of Emberfall, where she is trying to free, I've forgotten his name, where she is trying to free Prince Ren from the effects of magic. This book did save itself a little bit in the end. I thought the ending was actually quite good, and it didn't quite follow the template that I thought it was going to follow, so that's definitely a plus. But this book doesn't follow Harper and Ren at all. They're barely in it. This book follows Grey. I don't really know how I feel about that, to just not have the second book in your series follow the people your series about at all. Again, this book does kind of have a discussion of what makes a villain and who is the villain in this story, but it didn't do it as well as Vicious. And I just remember leaving this book being really glad that it was over, and it was just a massive letdown. The story that Bridget Camera was trying to tell got very lost in this book. It also felt very, very much like a B-Tech ripoff of ACOTAR. ACOTAR, if you don't know, is a Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J Maas. Specifically, this felt like a ripoff of ACOMAF. Like, I understand that they're both Beauty and the Beast retellings, so there are going to be similarities, but this had similarities in non-Beauty and the Beast parts. Like, this had similarities in the original parts, and like the characters had similarities. I don't know if that was intentional, but either way, I don't like it. Yeah, I've really fallen out of love with this series and Bridget Camera as an author. And then we have the third and final park that I got to. Wow, we're on to the third park already. I've had more fun filming this than I thought that I would. So the first book that I picked up for this was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This was my pick for an intimidating read, I believe, but I don't remember what ride that was. I DNF'd this. This was my only DNF of the whole readathon, and not because it was bad. This book is stunningly written. It is beautiful. If you like a secret history, I strongly recommend this. It is absolutely stunning and has the same kind of like friendship dynamics. So this follows our main character Oliver, and he has just been released from prison, and he's sitting down with the detective who was working on that case, and he's agreed to finally tell the detective what actually happened back when he was at school and a murder was committed. You don't know if he actually committed the murder, you know he went to prison for it, but you don't know that he actually did it. And it is told as this interview as you go back to this very dark academia, Shakespearean theatre school, and you go through this friendship and you find out what happened. I got really far into it. I got over halfway before I DNF'd this, because even though I knew very early on that this was too dark for my mental state, I was feeling way too anxious about my own life to start getting anxious about Oliver's. Even though I knew that really early on, I just couldn't put it down. It was written so well. I really wanted to know what happened. Like, I'm sad that I don't know what happened, but I'm not gonna Google it in case I want to go back. It's also, what I love is that rather than chapters, it has like scene 1, scene 2, act 1, you know, like it's kind of structured as a play, even though it's not written as one. I do really recommend this. I just would be aware going in that, like a secret history, this has a very dark tone, and so I'm sad that I DNF'd it. It's not a reflection on this book that I DNF'd it, it is a reflection of my own mental state. And then we come to my reread. After If We Were Villains, I was in need of a comfort book, which is good because the next prompt was to read a comfort book, and so I chose The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. It was a very V.E. Schwab month, but I love her writing. And I read this last year. I loved it so much when I read it the first time around, and it is a very like cozy, heartwarming story, so I thought it would be perfect for this prompt, and I loved it the second time around. I will say I think I had more fun with it and read it much faster and just had a more enjoyable time with it the first time that I read it, just because when I read it this time around, it was still like, it stuck with me so much that I still knew absolutely everything that was going to happen. And whilst that's kind of a given of a reread. Even though I still loved the story, my experience of reading it was like a bit harder to read this time because I wasn't as excited because I already knew everything, you know? I still love this book. This follows our main character, Addie LaRue, and she makes a deal with the devil that she will live longer and get to be free and avoid being forced into a marriage and avoid all of the things that come with life in the 18th century. She wants to avoid it. So she makes a deal with the devil that she'll be free. However, there is a slight catch, and that means that in order to be free, absolutely no one remembers her at all. She can go in, speak to someone, introduce herself, make friends, whatever, but the minute a door closes between them, they completely forget absolutely everything about her. It's a really, really heartwarming story. I will say, reading this a second time around as well, I did notice why some people complain about this book. I don't think it's slow-paced at all, and I think the slow pace reflects Addie's very slow life and how trapped she feels in this life when no one remembers her. I think it does a good job at reflecting that, but I do understand the comments about how Eurocentric this is. Addie is supposed to have been alive for 300 years, and the only places she goes to are like France, Italy, and America. Like, that's a little bit of a problem. Maybe though, if this becomes a series, like we'll get to see like flashbacks of her going to other places. Because this book wrapped up enough that it could be a standalone, but there's also definitely room for this series to continue. I think V.E. Schwab has put herself in a really good place that if she wanted to continue it, it would make sense, but if she didn't, it would also still make sense. And then if you watched my most recent vlog, you will know that my last book for Animal Kingdom was supposed to be Rebecca, but I actually ended up swapping it out for Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, and I'm really, really happy that I swapped to this book, because whilst it took me 2 days to read 100 pages of Rebecca, I read this whole 500-page book in 3 days. I really, really enjoyed myself, but I've decided to only rate it a 3.5 stars. I think if I was rating based on enjoyment, it would very easily be a 4 stars, maybe even up for debate with a 5 star. And I do usually rate on enjoyment, but this book doesn't really deserve higher than a 3.5 stars, and I can't ignore that no matter how much I actually enjoyed it. So to me, Jennifer L. Armentrout is more of a romance author than she is a fantasy one, and this kind of comes through in this book. The romance was like 50 times stronger than the fantasy here. The fantasy was a little overcomplicated and confusing, and most of it was just battle scenes or really confusing explanations. And like, I got to the end of this book, I'm still not entirely sure that I actually understand the magic system, but the romance was like top tier. I loved the romance in this so much. It's a really unique romance. I also really appreciated that we have a book this long. We also had a first book in this series that was this long, and Jennifer L. Armentrout found a way to keep the romance in this book exciting and give it a will they won't they without making it a love triangle. There was no love triangle. So like, it gets major bonus points for that. It still fell into the second book trap though. Like, nothing in this book really happens until right at the end. Like, it's very second book trap. But because it has such strong romance and smutty elements and a will they won't they, it doesn't feel as boring as second book in fantasy series do, because you were constantly like turning the page, like what is going to happen between Poppy and Castillo, like what's going on, you know? So I feel like a 3.5 star is a pretty good compromise. I think it had a lot of pros. I also think it had some cons, but I still really enjoyed it. So 3.5 star is like a pretty good rating to compromise between those things. And so here are the 10 books that I read for the Magical Hopathon. It would have been cool to say that I read all 13, but I'm pretty happy with 10, and these are big books. Almost all of these are over 400 pages. At least 1, 2, and 3 were over 500 pages long, so I'm pretty happy with 10. Thank you guys very, very much for watching this video and showing any interest in my life and my reading whatsoever. It's It's so difficult to explain how much it means, but it does mean a lot, so thank you for watching. If you guys enjoyed this and you want to go check out my November TBR or my other wrap-ups or my other reading vlogs, do feel free to do that. I have playlists for absolutely everything on my channel. And you can also, you know, maybe hit that big red subscribe button down below. I upload twice a week on a Wednesday and a Friday, so there is no shortage of bookish content here for you to enjoy. I'm out of breath after saying all that. You can also feel free to check me out on Instagram and Twitter at Page and Chapter, where you'll get more regular updates about what I'm reading, what I'm thinking of them as I'm reading them, so you won't have to wait the whole month to see what I think of a book. So yeah, feel free to do that if you are interested. Let me know how your month of reading in October went, how your magical hopathons went, what you think of any of these books. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, you enjoy everything you are reading, and there are no reading slumps in your future whatsoever, and I will see you for my next video. Bye guys.